Welcome to Blessed Man Meditations. My name is Andy. On this YouTube channel, you'll find various videos produced in an effort to defend historic Christianity from alternative viewpoints that skeptics and others bring. I hope you'll find value in my work in the video that you're about to watch. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I look forward to receiving your feedback. Welcome to Blessed Man Meditations, everyone. My name's Andy. Today we're wrapping up I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, getting close to the very end in the appendices of that book. Here is the cover of that book. There are the authors, Norm Geisler on the left, Frank Turek on the right. The first appendix is number 16 there on the right bottom, If God, Why Evil? I have a published work out there, 30-chapter volume on the Book of Psalms, by publisher Zulon Press. The title is Pinnacles and Plateaus, Meditations with the Psalmist. So in the first appendix, we have a conversation between an atheist and a Christian. And this is about the question, if there's a God, why is there evil? So we have an atheist, and I'm going to try to just toggle back and forth between the atheist and the Christian so you'll know who's saying what, but I think it'll be obvious as we go through it. So the atheist begins, he says, if there's really an all-good, all-powerful theistic God, then why does he allow evil? Well, how do you know what evil is unless you know what good is? And how do you know what good is unless there's an objective standard of good beyond yourself? Don't try to avoid the question. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'm simply showing you that your complaint presupposes that God exists. In fact, the existence of evil doesn't disprove God. It may prove that there's a devil, but it doesn't prove that there's no God. Interesting move, but I'm not convinced. You may not be convinced, but your complaint still presupposes God. For the sake of argument, suppose I grant you that God exists. Will you then answer the question? Sure. It's good to see you're making progress. Remember, it's just for the sake of argument. So why doesn't your so-called all-powerful God stop evil? Do you really want him to? Of course. Suppose he starts with you. Be serious. No, really. We always talk about God stopping evil, but we forget that if he did, he would have to stop us too. We all do evil. Oh, come on. We're not talking about the minor sins of you and me, but we're talking about real evil like what Hitler did. My point is not the degree of evil, but the source of evil. The source of evil is our free choice. If God were to do away with evil, then he would have to do away with free choice. And if he did away with our free choice, we would no longer have the ability to love or do good. This would no longer be a moral world. But not all evil is due to free choice. Why do babies die? Why do natural disasters occur? The Bible traces it all back to the fall of man. No one is really innocent because we all sinned in Adam, and as a consequence, we deserve death. Natural disasters and premature deaths are a result of the curse on creation because of the fall of humankind that we learn about in Genesis chapter 3 and Romans chapter 8. This fallen world will not be righted until Christ returns, that we see at the end of Revelation. So no one is guaranteed a trouble-free life or a full life of 70 years. Oh, isn't that convenient? Dust off the Bible and tell us that God will make it right in the end. I'm not interested in the future. I want pain and suffering to end now. Why won't God end it? He will end it, but just not on your timetable. Just because God hasn't ended evil yet doesn't mean that he never will end it. Why doesn't Christ return right now and end all this pain? The sum of human pain is enormous. First, no one's experiencing the sum of human pain. If it's 80 degrees in Manhattan, 85 in Brooklyn, and 80 in Queens, does any New Yorker experience a heat of 245 degrees? No. That's right. Each person experiences his own pain. But that still doesn't tell me why God doesn't end it all now. Why is he waiting? Let's see. Yeah, the last one was the atheist. But that still doesn't tell me why God doesn't end it now. Why is he waiting? If God wanted to end evil now, he could. But if you thought that maybe God has other goals that he'd like to accomplish while evil still exists? Like what? For starters, he'd like to have more people choose heaven before he closes the curtain on this world. Paul seems to indicate that Jesus will come back after the full number of people become believers. That's Romans chapter 11, verse 25. Well, while God's waiting for the full number of people to be saved, other people are hurting. Yes, they are, and that means Christians have a job to do. We have the privilege of helping those who are hurting. We are ambassadors for Christ here on earth. That's nice, but if I were suffering, I'd rather have God help me than you. If God prevented pain every time we got in trouble, then we would become the most reckless, self-centered creatures in the universe, and we would never learn from suffering. Learn from suffering? What are you talking about? You've just hit on another reason why God doesn't end evil right now. Can you name me one enduring lesson that you ever learned from pleasure? Give me a minute. I could give you an hour. I doubt you'd come up with much. If you think about it, you'll find that virtually every valuable lesson you've ever learned resulted from some hardship in your life. In most cases, bad fortune teaches while good fortune deceives. In fact, you not only learn lessons from suffering, but it's practically the only way you can develop virtues. What do you mean? You can't develop courage unless there's danger. You can't develop perseverance unless you have obstacles in your way. You won't learn how to be a servant unless there's someone to serve, and compassion would never be summoned if there were never anyone in pain or in need. It's the old adage, no pain, no gain. But I wouldn't need all those virtues if God would just quarantine evil right now. But since God has reasons for not quarantining evil right now, you need to develop virtues for this life and the life hereafter. This earth is an uncomfortable home, but it's a great gymnasium for the hereafter. You Christians always punt to the hereafter. You're so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. We may be heavenly minded, but we know that what we do on earth matters in eternity. Virtues that a believer develops through pain and through suffering will enhance his capacity to enjoy eternity. Paul says that our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. How is hardship here going to help me feel better in a place where there's not going to be any pain anyway? You like football, don't you? I've watched a few games. How does every player on the Super Bowl winning team feel after the game? Great, of course. Does the captain of the winning team, who also won the MVP trophy, enjoy the victory more than the third-string quarterback who didn't play it down all year? I suppose so. Of course he does. While the third-string quarterback's happy to be on the winning team, the victory is much sweeter for the captain who won the MVP trophy because he contributed to the win and persevered through the entire year to get there. By persisting through all the hardships and pains of playing, he actually enhanced his capacity to enjoy the victory, and it's made even sweeter by the MVP trophy. What does football have to do with heaven? Heaven will be like the winning locker room, but without the smell. We'll all be happy to be there, but some will have a greater ability to enjoy it and have more rewards than others. After all, God's justice demands that there will be degrees of rewards in heaven just like there will be degrees of punishment in hell. So you're saying that life is like a Super Bowl? To a certain extent, yes. Like a Super Bowl, life has rules, a referee, and rewards. But in life, there are no spectators. Everyone's in the game, and we already know who will win. Christ will win, and anyone, regardless of ability, can be a winner by simply joining the team. While everyone on the team will enjoy the victory parade, some will appreciate it even more because of the hardships they experienced during the game and the rewards they receive for playing it well. In other words, the feeling of victory is greater the more intense the battle is. So you're saying that evil has a purpose that has implications in eternity? Yes. Why do you insist on putting everything in the light of eternity? Because we're all going to be dead a lot longer than we're going to be alive. Furthermore, the Bible teaches us to look to the eternal, and life makes sense only in light of eternity. But if there's no eternity, then there's no ultimate purpose for anything, pleasures or pains. Suppose there is no eternity. Suppose we live, die, and that's it. It's possible, but I don't have enough faith to believe it. Why not? Haven't you read this book? No, I jumped right to the appendix. That's just like you, isn't it? You don't want to play the game, you just want to see the final score. I suppose I suffer from the American disease of instant gratification. Boy, don't we all. That's probably why you're having trouble realizing the value of suffering and no pain, no gain. You're right, reading this book is too painful. It's too long. It could be shorter. It could be shorter if we didn't have to address all those crazy arguments you atheists bring up. Besides, you've got time to read. Sunday mornings are free for you. There's a lot less painful things I could do on Sunday mornings. Look, I know this book may be painful to read, but it's more painful to reject its conclusion. You've got to read this book from beginning to end if you want to see the whole argument for Christianity. The case is laid out in logical order. Each chapter builds on the previous one. Whoops. Yeah. Look, I know this book may be painful to read, but it's more painful to reject its conclusion. You've got to read this book from beginning to end if you want to see the whole argument for Christianity. The case is laid out in logical order. Each chapter builds on the previous one. All right, I'll read the book, but in the meantime, let's get back to the question of evil. If there's an eternity, then some evils in this world may have an eternal purpose, but there are certainly some evil acts in this world that have absolutely no purpose. How do you know? It's obvious. What good purpose could there be in, say, the terrorist attacks on 9/11? While I wish it never happened, there are some good things that we know about that. That we know about let's see. While I wish it never happened, there were some good things that we know about that came out of those terrible events. For example, we came together as a country. We helped those in need. We resolved to fight the evil of terrorism. We also were shocked into pondering the ultimate questions about life. And some people came to Christ as a result of it. As C.S. Lewis said, pain is God's megaphone to arouse a deaf world. 9/11 certainly woke us up. Yes, you can find a silver lining in just about anything, but there's no way your silver lining outweighs the pain and suffering. How do you know? Unless you're all-knowing and have an eternal perspective, how do you know the events of 9/11 will not work together for good in the end? Perhaps there are many good things that will come out of that tragedy in the individual lives we will never hear about. In fact, good results may even come generations from now, unbeknownst to those who will experience them. Come on, that's a cop-out. No, it's simply recognizing our limits and acknowledging the limitless knowledge and unseen purposes of God. We can't see the future on earth, much less what eternity in heaven will be like, so how can we say that the ultimate eternal outcome of 9/11 won't work out for good? We already know some good things that have resulted from it. Just because we can't think of an ultimate good reason or purpose for it, that doesn't mean that an infinite God doesn't have one. If you would tell me his reasons, then maybe I could believe you. Job already tried that tactic. After Job questioned God about why he suffered, God baffled Job with questions about the wonders of creation. It's as if God were saying to him, Job, you can't even understand how to run the physical world that you can see, so how are you going to understand the vastly more complex moral world that you can't see? A world where the results of billions of free choices made by human beings every day interact with one another. Indeed, it would be impossible for us to comprehend such complexity. By the way, have you ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Do you mean the one with Jimmy Stewart that's shown every winter solstice? Yeah, that's the one. Jimmy Stewart plays George Bailey, a character who's despondent because his business dealings have gone bad and his life seems to be falling apart. He's averted from suicide at the last minute by an angel who shows him what life would have been like for others if George had never been born. It turns out that life would have been terrible for many people throughout his hometown, but George never knew this. He never realized the amazing impact his life had on others, hence the title, It's a Wonderful Life. Bah humbug. Come on, you get the point, don't you? Yeah, I get the point. We don't know what impact any person or event might have in the long run, especially since there are so many interacting choices being made. Yes, even the choices meant for hell can turn out for good, like what happened to Joseph in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. Perhaps many people now or generations from now will come to Christ because of the direct or indirect effects of evil events. But it seems like that's an argument from ignorance. No, it's not like we have no information about why bad things happen. We know we live in a fallen world, and we know that good things can come from bad. So we know it's possible that God can have a good reason for bad things, even if we don't know what those reasons are. And we know he can bring good from bad. So it's not an argument from ignorance, but a reasonable conclusion from what we do know. And while we don't know the reason for every specific bad thing that happens, we know that we know why we don't know, and we don't know because of our human limitations. What do you think about Rabbi Kushner's answer to the question? He wrote the book Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. I think his answer is wrong. Wrong? Why? Because his answer is that God's not powerful enough to defeat evil on earth, so we need to forgive God for allowing evil. What's wrong with that? Because there's strong evidence that God is infinitely powerful. 56 times in the Bible, God is referred to as Almighty, and in several other ways, he's described as all-powerful. We also know from scientific evidence that he created this universe out of nothing, from chapter 3 in this book. So Rabbi Kushner's finite God doesn't square with the facts. If God is infinitely powerful, as you say, then why does he allow bad things to happen to good people? We've already pointed out that there are good outcomes for pain and suffering, but we also need to point out that the question makes an assumption that isn't true. What's that? There are no good people. Oh, come on. No, really. Some people are better than others, but no one's really good. We all have a natural bent towards selfishness, and we all commit sins routinely. I do more good things than bad. By whose standard? By society's standard. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm not a murderer or a thief. That's the problem. We consider ourselves good people only by the standards of bad people. We judge ourselves against others rather than against the absolute standard of good. By the way, have you ever stolen anything? Well, yes. Have you ever lied about anything? No. You're lying. I can't fool you. So you're a lying thief then. That doesn't mean I'm all bad. No, but it means you're not all good either. Think about it. It's much easier to be bad than good. It's much more natural to you to be selfish rather than generous. We all have that depraved human nature. As Augustine said, as St. Augustine said, we're all born with a propensity to sin and a necessity to die. That propensity is inborn. That's why young children naturally grab things and yell, mine. And it's also why James Madison said if men were angels, no government would be necessary. So Kushner makes incorrect assumptions about the nature of man and the nature of God. Exactly. The question's not why do bad things happen to good people, but why do good things happen to bad people? If God really is all-powerful, as you say, I still don't understand why he didn't stop 9/11. If you knew it was going to happen and had the power to stop it, wouldn't you have stopped it? Yes. So you're better than God? No. By stopping 9/11, I'd be preventing evil. But God, who has an unlimited eternal perspective, allows evil choices knowing that he can redeem them in the end. We can't redeem such choices, so we try to stop everyone. Yes, but by your own Christian doctrine, God doesn't redeem all evil choices in the end. After all, some people go to hell. Yes, but that's because God can bring eternal good only to those who will accept it. Some people ignore the facts or simply choose to play in the game in a way that brings them defeat. Since God cannot force them to freely choose to play the game the right way, ultimate good comes only to those who choose it. That's why Paul says, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. Notice he doesn't say all things are good. He says all things work together for good to those who love him. For the good of those who love him. So how did all things work together for good for those who died in 9/11? Those who loved God and accepted the free gift of salvation are with God in eternity. Those who did not are having their free choice of eternal separation respected as well. And the rest of us? Those who remain here still have time to make our decision, and those who were already Christians at the time may have had their character strengthened through 9/11. But if God's all good and all-knowing, why would he create creatures who he knew would go to hell? Why would God create creatures he knew would go to hell? Good question. There are only 5 options God had. He could have not created at all. He could have created a non-free world of robots. He could have created a free world where we would not sin. He could have created a free world where we would sin, but everyone would accept God's salvation. Or he could have created a world we have, like the one we have now, a world where we would sin and some would be saved and the rest would be lost. Yes, and it seems like God picked the worst of those 5 options, so God's not all good. Not so fast. The first option can't even be compared to the other 4 because something and nothing have nothing in common. Comparing a real world and a non-world is not even like comparing apples and oranges since they both are fruit. It's like comparing apples and non-apples, insisting that non-apples taste better. In logic, this is called a category mistake. It's like asking what color is math? Math's not a color, so the question's meaningless. If comparing existence to non-existence is a category mistake, then Jesus made a category mistake when he said it would have been better if Judas had not been born. No, Jesus was not talking about the supremacy of non-being over being. He was simply making a forceful point about the severity of Judas's sin. Okay, so why didn't God make a second option, a robot world? He could have, but that wouldn't have been a moral world. It would have been a world with no evil, a world with no evil, but with no moral good either. So why didn't he make worlds 3 or 4? Those worlds would allow love, and they certainly would be better worlds than this one. Yes, but not everything conceivable is actually achievable with free creatures. For example, it's conceivable that I could have been robbing a bank instead of talking to you, but that's not achievable because I freely choose to talk to you. Likewise, God can't force free creatures not to sin. Forced freedom is a contradiction. But this world could be better if there were 1 less murder or 1 less rape. So God failed because he didn't create the best possible world. Hold on. While I'll admit that this world's not the best possible world, it may be the best way to get to the best possible world. What kind of theistic psychobabble is that? God may have permitted evil in order to defeat it. As I've already said, evil's not allowed. And the higher virtues cannot be, then the higher If evil's not allowed, as I've already said, if evil's not allowed, then the higher virtues cannot be attained. People who are redeemed have stronger character than people who have not been tested. Soul building requires some pain. The Job of chapter 42 is a deeper and more joyful man than the Job of chapter 1. So evil in this world actually serves a good purpose in the end. It creates an eternal world that's the best possible world. But why would God create people knowing that they would choose hell? Do you have children? Yes. In fact, I'm a former child myself. Why did you have them, knowing that someday they would disobey you? My wife asks me that question a lot. I know why I did, because love takes risks. I was willing to take the risk of loss in order to experience the joy of love. The same is true of every Super Bowl. Both teams can know that one will lose, yet both are willing to play the game despite that risk. I must admit your intellectual answers make some sense, but evil still bothers me. Bothers me too, and it should. We all know that this world just isn't right, and we all long for heaven. Perhaps our longing for heaven's another clue that it's really there. Some of the other clues being the evidence we presented in this book. Perhaps, but I don't think your intellectual answers will sustain a person through evil. You may be right, but you don't have to withstand evil with just answers. You can have access to the divine comforter, the Holy Spirit, to help you through the soul-building life of pain and suffering. I'd rather not suffer at all than to have a comforter. Maybe that's why God doesn't put pain and suffering on our control. If he did, who would choose to go through it? No one. Well, that's not exactly true. One man certainly chose to suffer. Jesus Christ volunteered to suffer so you and I could be reconciled to God. It's been the only real case of a bad thing happening to a truly good person. So we can complain to God about pain and suffering, but we have to admit that he did not exempt himself from it. As for you and me, sometimes God saves us from evil, but sometimes he comforts us through evil. In either event, whether we know his reasons or not, believers can trust God that all things work together for good according to his eternal plan. That's the end of Appendix 1. Appendix 2 isn't that just your interpretation? I believe Appendix 2 is shorter than Appendix 1. So please stay tuned for that. So Appendix 2 is entitled, Isn't That Just Your Interpretation? It's a dialogue between an atheist and a Christian. I am going to toggle I'm going to read the dialogue to you, and I'm going to try to toggle back and forth between atheist and Christian like this. But on the first one, I didn't say atheist and Christian, I just toggled, and this one I will try to say it in case you're listening but not watching, so you'll know, but then you might be able to figure out which one's talking. So Appendix 2 begins with the atheist speaking, and the atheist says, okay, I went back and read this entire book just like you asked, but I don't think you've made the case that Christianity's true. Christian, why not? Atheist, because it's just your interpretation. Christian, of course it's my interpretation, but that doesn't mean my interpretation's wrong. Atheist, I say it is wrong. Christian, is that just your interpretation? Atheist, so you're turning the tables on me. Christian, yes, all conclusions involve making an interpretation, including yours. And in order for you to know that my interpretation of Christianity is objectively wrong, you'd have to know what is objectively right. So what is your right interpretation? Atheist, there are no objective interpretations. Christian, forgive me for doing this again, but is that an objective interpretation? Atheist, stop that! Christian, stop what? Being logical? I'm just using the Roadrunner tactic from chapter 1. When you say something it's self-defeating, I feel compelled to point it out. So how can you make the objective interpretation that there are no objective interpretations? Atheist, okay, so maybe there are objective interpretations. Christian, yes, there are. While you may interpret the evidence and conclude that Christianity is false, I may do the same and conclude that it's true. But since opposites cannot both be true, one of us must be right, the other one must be wrong. So who's right? Atheist, well, I am. Christian, why? Atheist, I just think I'm right. Or they might say, well, because we have science, we have evidence. Christian, but that's just an assertion. You must give evidence rather than just make assertions. In this book, we didn't make assertions that Christianity is true. We gave evidence every step of the way, from the question of truth all the way to the inspiration of the Bible. What evidence do you have to claim that atheism is true? Atheist, evil and science. Christian, That's not positive evidence for atheism, but merely perceived obstacles to belief in Christianity. As we've seen, the existence of evil doesn't disprove God. That was in the last appendix. And the scientific discoveries actually support the Christian worldview. That was discussed in chapters 3 through 6 of this book, Atheist. But if Christianity is true, it excludes too many people. After all, millions of people are not Christians. That doesn't determine whether Christianity is true or not. After all, truth is not determined by how many people believe it. Truth is discovered by looking at the evidence. Is your interpretation that Christianity is false necessarily wrong because it excludes millions of Christians? No. Atheist? No. Christian? Neither's mine, then. Besides, as we saw when we talked about evil, Christianity doesn't exclude people. People exclude themselves from Christianity. Everyone knows that God exists. But because we all have free will, some people choose to suppress that knowledge so they can follow their own desires. Paul talks about that in Romans chapter 1. Atheist. Maybe so, but I find your conclusion extremely judgmental, and you know you ought not judge. Sarcastically using the Bible against the Christian. Christian, forgive me again, but if we ought not judge, then why are you judging me for judging? Very good. Atheist. What's the matter, Mr. Holy? You'd rather play logic games than believe what Jesus said? Christian. It's not a mere game, but an observation about the way things really are. It's self-defeating to tell me you ought not judge when that's a judgment itself. Furthermore, you're making a judgment when you say Christianity's not true. Atheist. Okay. What about my second point? Don't you believe what Jesus said? Christian. Why are you quoting the Bible? Do you believe it's true now? Atheist. No, but you do. So why don't you believe what Jesus said? Christian. I do. The problem is you don't know what he said. Jesus did not tell us not to judge. He simply told us not to judge hypocritically. He said, don't judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you'll be judged, and with the measure you use, will be measured to you. That's Matthew 7, verses 1 and 2. He then went on to say, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. In other words, when you judge, don't judge hypocritically. The Bible also commands us to make judgments when it tells us to test everything. That's 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test everything. And to not believe every spirit, 1 John 4:1, but to believe in Jesus Christ for eternal life, John 3:16. Atheist, are you done? No, there's one more point, Christian says. It would be impossible to live very long if you didn't judge good from evil. You make hundreds of vital decisions every day that can either hurt you or help you. When you make those decisions, you're making judgments. Atheist. All right, I see everyone makes judgments, and you're making judgments by interpreting the Bible the way you do. Who's to say your interpretation's right? Christian. You need to look at the context of the passage to discover objective meaning. Atheist. If objective interpretations are possible, then why are there so many different interpretations of the Bible? Christian. Why do so many people get their math sums right? Is there no right answer to arithmetic problems? Atheist. Language is different. I think there are many interpretations of a sentence or a Bible verse that are true. That's why you get so many denominations. Christian. So you're saying that sentences can be interpreted in only one way? Atheist. No, didn't you hear what I just said? I said exactly the opposite is true. There are many valid interpretations. Christian. If there are many valid interpretations, then why did you just correct me for misinterpreting what you said? Atheist. I did? Yes. Christian. Yes, you just told me I misunderstood you. In effect, you said that my interpretation was wrong. Why did you do that if there are many valid interpretations? Atheist. Because I knew what I meant, and it should have been obvious to you. Christian. You're right, so let me ask you this. Why is it that when you make a statement, you expect others to know what you mean, but when God makes a statement in the Bible, you give yourself the option of pouring any meaning you want into it? Atheist. So maybe there are objective interpretations, but if there are, then why are there so many denominations? Christian. For the same reason there are a lot of non-Christians. It's not because the truth is not perceived, it's because the truth is not received. In other words, we believe our own traditions and desires over the Word of God. Jesus spoke forcefully against doing this in Matthew chapter 15 and Matthew chapter 23. Atheist. All right, I'm going to come clean with you. Christian. It's about time. Atheist. The real problem I have with Christianity is that it leads to intolerance. You Christians all think you have the truth. Christian. Haven't you noticed that everyone thinks they have the truth? Those who say Christianity is false think they have that truth. Even those who say that every religion is true think that's the truth. Atheist. Okay, you're right. I think atheism's true, but I'm not intolerant like most Christians. Christian. Even if Christians are intolerant, that would mean Christianity's false. Atheist. I realize that, but it's still a practical problem. Christian. How so? Atheist. Because people who think they have the truth want to impose the truth on others. Christian. Do you mean politically? Atheist, yes. Christian, I've got news for you. Everyone involved in politics, including every non-Christian, is trying to impose what he or she thinks is the truth. So what's your point? Atheist, my point is that Christians want to take away the rights of people. Actually, Christianity is one of the few worldviews that can justify absolute human rights because it affirms that those rights are given to us by God. As our founders recognized, governments aren't meant to give or take away rights. Governments are meant to secure rights that people already possess. That's what we affirmed in our Declaration of Independence. Atheist, but what about tolerance? Christianity is one of the few worldviews that not only offers but champions religious tolerance. Since God doesn't force anyone to believe, in fact, the purpose of this life is to make a free choice. Most Christians recognize that government shouldn't force belief either. Atheist, but during the Crusades, some Christians obviously thought differently. They may have called themselves Christians, but they certainly weren't following Christ's teachings. Jesus never condoned such conduct. Atheist, I think a completely secular government's the most tolerant of all. After all, there's religious freedom in secular countries in Europe. Those countries do exist, but most of them are living off the remnants of the Christian worldview from the previous generations. How much religious freedom is there in a self-declared atheistic country such as China, or how much was there in the former Soviet Union? Not much. And if you go to most Muslim countries today, you'll also find very little religious freedom. Last I checked, churches are not allowed in Saudi Arabia, and most other Muslim countries treat Christians as second-class citizens. Atheist, that may be true for religious tolerance, but most Christians are not tolerant about certain moral issues. Christian, do you think tolerance is an absolute moral obligation? Atheist, you're trying to connect moral obligations with God again, aren't you? There is no other connection. As we saw in chapter 7, there are no moral obligations or moral rights if there is no God. So why should anyone be tolerant if there's no moral obligation to be tolerant? Atheist, because it's the right thing to do. That's just another assertion, Christian says. As an atheist, you have no way to justify why anyone should be tolerant. Atheist, maybe not, but as a Christian, you do. So why don't you believe that we ought to be tolerant? Christian, actually, the supreme moral obligation is love, not tolerance. Tolerance says hold your nose up and put up with others. Love says reach out and help others. Atheist, why can't you be tolerant and loving? Or why can't you be tolerant and loving? Christian, you can, but sometimes love requires you to be intolerant. For example, wouldn't it be unloving to tolerate murder, rape, and theft, or rape? Wouldn't it be unloving to tolerate murder, rape? Wouldn't it be unloving to tolerate murder, rape, theft, or racism? Atheist, I suppose so. Christian, good. But we're getting a little off subject. The focus of Christianity is spiritual, not social salvation. While Christians certainly have social obligations, Christ came to free us from our sins, not to free us from the Romans. Atheist, you wouldn't know that by the behavior of some Christians today. Christian, you mean you don't like their biblical views on moral issues like abortion or homosexuality? Atheist, yes. Christian, so? Atheist, what do you mean so? Those issues are important to me. Are those issues so important to you that you're willing to give up the truth itself in order to keep them? Let's try that one again. Christian, are those issues so important to you that you're willing to give up truth itself in order to keep them? Atheist, what are you talking about? Christian, the issue is truth, not what you find politically or personally attractive. Do you think you ought to believe what's true? Atheist, of course. Every reasonable person would say yes to that. Christian, so if Christianity is true, you ought to believe it regardless of the impact you think it might have on politics, moral issues, or any other facet of your life. Atheist, that's hard to do. Christian, maybe, but it's a lot harder in the long run to believe error. Christ said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? Do you really want to exchange your eternal soul for temporal political positions or personal preferences? Atheist, if Christianity is true, that's the choice I have to make. Christian, yes, and God wants you to choose him. But he loves you so much that he'll respect either choice you make. Just remember, either choice you make will have consequences here and in eternity, and that's not just my interpretation. That's the end of Appendix 2. So Appendix 3, why the Jesus seminar doesn't speak for Jesus. This is going to be a really brief one. Okay. Many Christians have been troubled recently by a group known as the Jesus Seminar that has made outlandish claims regarding the New Testament, casting doubt on 80% of what the Gospels ascribe to Jesus. One member, John Dominic Crossan, even went so far in his denial of the resurrection as to claim that Jesus was buried in a shallow grave dug up by dogs and eaten. But the so-called Jesus Seminar does not speak for the real Jesus. There are at least 7 reasons for this conclusion. First, they're the wrong group. The Jesus Seminar, established in 1985, is comprised of 70 plus scholars who are largely on the radical fringe. Some are atheists, some are not even scholars. One is a filmmaker. Atheist founder Robert Funk acknowledged the radical nature of their work when he stated, quote, "We're probing what is most sacred to millions, and hence we will constantly border on blasphemy," end quote. This is an honest and accurate disclosure. In addition, they have the wrong motive. By their own admission, their goal is to create a new fictive Jesus, which involves deconstructing one that fits modern man. In view of this, no one should look to their work for the real Jesus. They're making Jesus in their own image. Moreover, their work is tainted by their confessed publicity seeking. They admitted, "We are going to try to carry out our work in full public view. We will not only honor the freedom of information, we will insist on the public discourse of our work." More bluntly, the Jesus Seminar sought publicity from the very beginning. A TV summit, numerous articles and interviews with the press, tapes, and even a possible movie are further indications of their aim to advertise. In addition to having the wrong group, the wrong motive, they have the wrong procedure. Their procedure is prejudiced, attempting to determine truth by majority vote. This method's not better today than when most people believed the world was square. Having 70 largely radical scholars vote on what Jesus said is akin to giving 100 largely liberal members of Congress a chance to vote on higher taxes. In addition to having the wrong group, the wrong motive, the wrong procedure, they have the wrong books. The Jesus Seminar vote is based in part on a hypothetical Gospel of Q from the German Quell, meaning source, and a 2nd century Gospel of Thomas, which comes from Gnostic sources, comes from Gnostic heretics. In addition to these, the seminar appeals to a non-existent secret mark. The result is that the apocryphal 2nd century Gospel of Thomas is considered more authentic than the earlier Mark or John. In addition to the wrong procedure, in addition to the wrong group, the wrong motive, the wrong procedure, and the wrong books, they have the wrong assumptions. Their conclusions are based on radical presuppositions, one of which is their unjustified rejection of miracles. If God exists, then miracles are possible. Hence, any a priori rejection of miracles is a rejection of God's existence. In light of their implicit atheism, there should be no surprise that they reject the Jesus of the Gospels. Further, their conclusions are based on the unfounded assumption that Christianity was influenced by mystery religions. As we saw in chapter 12, this could not be the case. The monotheistic Jewish writers of Scripture would not be using polytheistic pagan sources and could not be dependent on sources that were later than their time. Okay. In addition to the wrong group, the wrong motive, the wrong procedure, the wrong books, the wrong assumptions, they have the wrong dates. They posit unjustified late dates for the 4 Gospels, probably AD 70 to AD 100. By doing this, they believe they're able to create enough time to conclude that the New Testament is comprised of myths about Jesus. But this is contrary to the facts, as we saw in chapters 9 and 10. The New Testament is early and contains even earlier source material. In addition to having the wrong group, the wrong motive, the wrong procedure, the wrong books, the wrong assumptions, and the wrong dates, this group has the wrong conclusions. In the wake of destroying the basis for the real Jesus of the Gospels, the real Jesus of the Gospels, the Jesus Seminar has no real agreement on who Jesus actually was. A cynic, a sage, a Jewish reformer, a feminist, a prophet teacher, a radical social prophet, or an eschatological prophet. It's little wonder that something done by the wrong group using the wrong procedure based on the wrong books, grounded in the wrong presuppositions, and employing the wrong dates would come to the wrong conclusion. That is why the Jesus Seminar does not speak for Jesus. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. That is the end of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And I hope you have a blessed rest of your day.